As a man forged by chaos, I built a silent, unbreakable fortress of code and wealth in my 20s, meticulously channeling its power to answer profound human needs. They say your 20s are for finding yourself. For me, they were for building a fortress, not of brick and mortar, but of glass, steel, and silent, unbreakable code. The world knows me as Ian Mendoza. If you read certain magazines, the glossy kind found in airport lounges and on the coffee tables of people who use summer as a verb, you've probably seen my face. Just last week, I was the cover story for the Asterisk American Philanthropy Quarterly Asterisk. The headline read, "The Ghost in the Machine, Ian Mendoza's Quiet Revolution." They called me brilliant, reclusive, and enigma. The article painted a picture of a 28-year-old who appeared out of nowhere 5 years ago, a ghost who sold a data compression algorithm called Synapse to a tech giant for a staggering $450 million, and then promptly vanished again, only to reemerge 2 years later, not on a yacht or a private island, but as the founder and sole benefactor of the Mendoza Initiative for Secular Aid. The picture they used was taken through the plate glass window of my office. I'm looking down at a tablet, my expression intense focused. The background is all clean lines and muted tones, the aesthetic of my entire life. They got that part right. I am a man who believes in order, in systems and logic, because I know better than most what happens when you're left with nothing but chaos. My fortress is headquartered on the 40th floor of a skyscraper that pierces the clouds. It's a space I designed myself. The walls are mostly glass, offering panoramic views of the city sprawling below. It's a constant reminder of scale of the millions of lives unfolding in a complex, interconnected system. There's no clutter here, no sentimental trinkets, no dusty awards. The air itself feels curated, filtered, free of complication. My team works in an open-plan space, but my office is separate, soundproofed. It's where I do the real work. It's where I review the final grant proposals. Each one represents a potential future, a life changed, a community strengthened, a door open. They come from all over the country, hundreds of them a month, filtered through 3 layers of analysts and program officers before a select few land on my desk. I read every single one that makes it this far. I owe them that, because every proposal is a story of need, and I have made it my life's mission to answer that need with cold, hard, effective resources. Today, my focus is on a proposal from a small nonprofit in the industrial Midwest. They want to convert an abandoned warehouse into a tech literacy center for at-risk youth. They've laid out their plan in meticulous detail. The budget is lean but realistic. The timeline is aggressive but achievable. They've projected graduation rates, skill acquisition metrics, and job placement percentages for the first 3 years. They've even included letters of intent from local businesses willing to offer apprenticeships. I scroll through the PDF, my finger tracing the lines of the budget. They're asking for seed funding to cover equipment instructor salaries and building retrofits. It's a significant amount, but it's an investment, not a handout. They aren't just offering to teach kids how to use a computer. They're offering to teach them the language of the modern world, the language of logic, the language of code, the language that saved my life. A quiet chime signals a visitor. I look up to see Eleanor Vance, the head of my board, standing in the doorway. She's a retired federal judge, sharp as a shard of glass, and one of the few people whose counsel I genuinely value. She gives a slight nod towards the tablet in my hands. "Find a winner," she asks, her voice calm and measured. "I think so," I replied, not looking away from the screen. "Project Phoenix. Tech literacy program for kids who've aged out of the foster system. The metrics are solid. The plan is scalable. There's no ideological component. It's clean." Eleanor steps inside, her gaze sweeping across the city before settling back on me. "Clean. That's your favorite word, Ian." It's the most important word, I say, finally looking up at her. We're not here to push a worldview. We're not here to save souls. We're here to provide tools, tangible, measurable, secular tools. A kid who can code has a future. A kid who can only pray has a 50-50 shot at best. The words come out colder than I intend, but Eleanor doesn't flinch. She's heard it all before. It's the foundational principle of the entire initiative. My one unbreakable rule, provable metrics, and zero ideological baggage. We fund shelters, not sermons. We build schools, not temples. We provide resources, not redemption. Eleanor smiles faintly. "Well, your clean approach seems to be working. Did you know next month marks our 3-year anniversary?" I blink. I hadn't known. The passage of time is something I track in project cycles and fiscal quarters, not sentimental milestones. 3 years, she continues, since you put up that initial $200 million, and we opened our doors. The impact reports are, well, they're staggering. You've changed thousands of lives, Ian. I feel a familiar discomfort creep in. Praise makes my skin crawl. It feels like a currency I don't know how to spend. It's abstract, immeasurable. I deflect as I always do. The team does the work, the metrics speak for themselves. That's all that matters. The team is incredible, she concedes, but they're following your blueprint, your vision. You built this from nothing. From less than nothing, I think, but I don't say it. The past is a locked room. There's no reason to give anyone the key. I tap the screen on the tablet, bringing the Phoenix project back into focus. Let's approve this one. Full funding, and flag it for a potential secondary grant next year if they hit their targets. Eleanor nods, a look of deep respect in her eyes that I still haven't gotten used to. Consider it done. I'll let the team know. Are you doing anything to mark the anniversary? The question hangs in the sterile air of my office. Doing anything celebrating, the concept is foreign. My victories aren't for celebrating. They are simply corrections. They are the balancing of an equation that started for me a long time ago, deep in the negative. I'll be here, I say, reading the next batch of proposals. She gives me a long, searching look, as if trying to solve a puzzle, then nods and quietly lets herself out. I'm left alone again with the silence in the city. She's right. I built this. Every dollar of the $450 million I made from Synapse came from my mind, from thousands of hours spent in a tiny rented room, fueled by cheap coffee and a desperate burning need to create something that couldn't be taken away from me. Something that was purely mathematically mine. When I established the initiative 3 years ago, I endowed it with $200 million. Not as a tax write-off, not as a vanity project, but as a weapon against the kind of helplessness I once knew. A systematic, well-funded, and ruthlessly logical war against the dark. I finalized the approval for the Phoenix project, a small, satisfying click echoing in the quiet room. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. A dusty warehouse filled with the hum of new computers. A young girl, maybe 16, writing her first line of code. The sudden, brilliant spark of understanding in her eyes as she realizes she can build a world with nothing but her own mind. She doesn't need anyone's permission. She doesn't need anyone's blessing. She just needs the tool. This is my purpose. This is my peace. It's a carefully constructed ecosystem of logic and control built on the ashes of a life I burned to the ground a decade ago. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across my minimalist office, I pack my briefcase. The routine is always the same. Drive home to my apartment, which is just as sparse and orderly as my office. Make a simple meal I eat alone. Read technical journals until my eyes burn. Sleep, wake up, repeat. There are no family photos on my walls, no mementos from a childhood I've surgically removed from my memory. My public impact is immense, my name etched onto plaques and in the hearts of people I'll never meet. But my private life is a vacuum, a fortress of solitude. It's the price of my freedom, and for 10 years I have paid it willingly, silently every single day. The silence has been my sanctuary. But silence, I was about to learn, is a fragile thing, and the ghosts you think you've buried have a way of remembering your name. The morning began as it always did. The sun rose over the city, a silent, indifferent spectacle I watched from my floor-to-ceiling window while my coffee brewed. The apartment was quiet, the air still. By 7 a.m., I was at my desk at the initiative's headquarters, the city still waking below me. My routine was my armor, a fortress built of predictable inputs and expected outputs. In the chaos of the world, my schedule was a perfect, elegant algorithm. I spent the first hour reviewing overnight data from our international projects. A literacy program in Southeast Asia had just hit its 3-month target for new enrollments. A clean water initiative in a sub-Saharan village was fully operational 2 weeks ahead of schedule. These were the metrics that mattered, clean, verifiable data points of progress. Lives improved measured in numbers, not anecdotes. This was the work. This was the purpose. Around 8:30, an automated email notification appeared on my screen. It was from our internal grant processing system, which I had designed myself. The subject line was simple, clinical, flagged for manual review, conflict of interest. I felt a flicker of curiosity, nothing more. The system was designed to cross-reference applicant leadership names against a database of my known associates, past business partners, and on a deeply buried and encrypted list, family members. It was a fail-safe to ensure absolute impartiality. In 3 years, it had been triggered only twice, both times for distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. I opened the file, The application was number 7304. The applicant organization was listed at the top in a clean sans serif font. Unified Word Community Outreach Program. The name hit me like a physical blow. The air in my lungs seemed to freeze. For a full 10 seconds, I didn't breathe. It was a name from another life, a name I had buried under a decade of work and a mountain of money. The covenant of the unified word, the religion of my parents. The faith that had no room for questions, no tolerance for doubt, and no mercy for the son who dared to have both. My hand was steady as I scrolled down my face, a mask of professional neutrality. My heart, however, was a frantic drum against my ribs. The proposal was for a new homeless shelter. It was well written, filled with compelling statistics about the city's unhoused population and heart-wrenching anonymous stories. They were requesting a grant to cover the acquisition and renovation of a building plus operational costs for the first 2 years. It was ambitious. It was exactly the kind of project the initiative was designed to support. For a wild, irrational moment, I thought it had to be a coincidence. But my own system had flagged it. My own logic had led me here. I navigated to the tab marked Leadership and Governance. And there they were, the digital ghosts at my perfectly ordered feast. Chairperson David Mendoza, Treasurer Maria Mendoza. My father, my mother. The minimalist office, my sanctuary of logic and control, suddenly felt like a cage. The city skyline outside my window blurred. I wasn't Ian Mendoza, the 28-year-old founder of a multi-million-dollar philanthropic foundation. For a searing, terrible moment, I was 18 again. I could feel the cold November air on my skin, the cheap fabric of the single jacket they'd allowed me to keep. I could hear my father's voice, not angry, but filled with a terrifying righteous certainty. He who denies the covenant denies the word, and he who denies the word has no place in this house. I could see my mother's face, her expression, not one of sadness, but of disappointment, as if I were a faulty appliance being returned. She didn't cry. She just nodded as my father spoke, her hands smoothing the front of her dress. She handed me a thin envelope containing $200, my final severance from the family unit. "May the word find you again when you are ready to listen," she had said. Then she closed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the last sound I ever heard from them. 10 years of silence. For the first 6 months, I slept in bus stations and under bridges, hoarding every dollar I made from washing dishes until I had enough to enroll in a single computer science course at a community college. For the next 5 years, I poured every waking hour into building the Synapse algorithm, driven by a fury so cold and so deep it felt like the engine of the universe. And now, after a decade of complete abandonment, they had reappeared. Not with an apology, not with a question of whether I was even alive, but with a grant application, with their hands out. The audacity of it was breathtaking, a gravitational force so immense it threatened to pull my carefully constructed world out of orbit. My training, my discipline, the very core of my new identity took over. Emotion was a variable that corrupted the system. I had to remove it. This was not about David and Maria Mendoza. This was about application 7304. I had built a protocol for a reason. The protocol would be my shield. I forced myself to read every line of the application. I analyzed their budget, their projections, their mission statement. It was all professionally done. They must have hired a grant writer. The language was perfect, hitting all the right notes of compassion and community impact. It was a Trojan horse, beautiful and gleaming on the outside, and I knew with an absolute certainty that it was hollow inside. I began to dig into the appendices, the fine print. I was looking for the bug in the code, the single line that would betray the entire program. And then I found it buried deep within a subsection titled Beneficiary Engagement and Community Integration. Clause 4, Section B read, "As a condition of continued residence and access to services, all program beneficiaries will be required to attend weekly Covenant of the Unified Word educational services to foster spiritual well-being and community alignment." There it was, the poison pill. It wasn't about charity, it was about conversion, a recruitment drive disguised as a homeless shelter. They weren't offering a hand up. They were setting a trap baited with a warm bed and a hot meal. And it was a direct, explicit violation of the most fundamental principle of my foundation. Article 1, Section 1 of the Mendoza Initiative's charter, which I had written myself, was unambiguous. Aid will be provided to all qualifying individuals and organizations without consideration of or requirement for any religious or ideological affiliation, test, or activity. The system had its answer. The logic was clear. My personal history was irrelevant. My anger was irrelevant. The rules I had created for everyone had to apply to them too. To make an exception would be to invalidate everything I had built. It would be letting their world, their rules, their conditional love infect and destroy mine. I opened my rejection template, a sterile formal document, and began to type. The words were cold, impersonal, corporate, a shield of impenetrable jargon. I read it over twice, checking for any hint of emotion, any crack in the facade. There was none. It was perfect. I attached the letter to their file in the system and navigated to the final screen. Send notification and archive. My cursor hovered over the button. For a moment, I saw their faces again. My father reading from his book at the dinner table. My mother humming in the kitchen. A life that was never really mine. They had made their choice 10 years ago. Now I was making mine. I was not their son rejecting his parents. I was the chair of a foundation enforcing its charter. I clicked the button. A small confirmation box appeared. Application hash 7304 has been rejected and archived. It was done. The file vanished from my queue. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow, deep breath. The drumming in my chest began to subside. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of a nearby monitor. My face was calm, unreadable. The system had worked. I had fed their hypocrisy into the machine I built, and it had been processed, analyzed, and discarded according to protocol. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold. I didn't care. I felt a clean, quiet sense of order restored. A ghost had knocked on my door, and I had turned it away, not with anger or with pain, but with the simple, irrefutable power of the rules. I had finally truly locked the door on them, or so I thought. For a week there was silence, a clean, beautiful, uncomplicated silence. I went to work. I reviewed proposals. I approved funding for a mobile library in a rural county and a scholarship for first-generation college students. My world was back in its proper orbit, governed by logic and purpose. The rejection of application hash 7304 felt like a distant minor system correction. I had successfully treated my own family as nothing more than a data point, an anomaly to be flagged and discarded. I had won. The illusion shattered the following Tuesday. My head of communications, a sharp woman I trusted, implicitly walked into my office without knocking. She held a tablet in her hand and her expression was grim. She didn't say a word, just placed it on my desk. The headline was from a small, faith-based online journal, the kind that thrives on outrage. Tech millionaire son rejects own parents' plea to help the needy. My blood ran cold. I read the article, my hands perfectly still. It was a masterpiece of manipulative fiction. It featured lengthy, emotional quotes from my parents, David and Maria Mendoza. They spoke of their deep love for their estranged son. They talked about how they prayed for me every night. They described their humble community outreach program, their simple desire to provide shelter for the homeless in the name of the covenant. They painted me as a cold, bitter apostate, a boy who had been corrupted by money and worldly ideas, so lost that he would deny his own mother and father a chance to do good in the world. They claimed that they had reached out with an olive branch, a chance to heal a 10-year-old wound, only to have it slapped away by a corporate rejection letter. They never mentioned why I left. They never mentioned my 18th birthday. They never mentioned the 6 months I spent sleeping in bus stations. They just said I had chosen a different path. The article ended with a quote from my father, David. "We just want our son to come home. We believe in forgiveness. We just hope his heart hasn't hardened so much that he can't find it in himself to forgive us. Forgive them for what? For raising me." The lie was so audacious, so complete, it was almost impressive. Within 48 hours, the story had been picked up by larger outlets. The narrative was just too good to pass up: the prodigal son, now a reclusive tech billionaire, versus his humble, God-fearing parents. My foundation's phones began ringing off the hook. The board was in full-blown crisis mode. Our entire reputation was built on unimpeachable ethics, and now we were being framed as a cold, family-hating machine run by a man with a heart of stone. Then my personal cell phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a notification popped up. A new message. I hesitated, then pressed play. Her voice. After 10 years, it was exactly the same. My mother, Maria, but the tone wasn't one of reconciliation. It was the same one she used when I tracked mud on her clean floors as a child. A tone of weary, righteous disappointment. "Ian," she began, her voice thick with false emotion. "Your father and I saw the news. We never wanted this to become so public. This is a family matter. You are making a spectacle of us, of the family name. All we are asking is for you to do the right thing. You have so much and we are asking for so little. Think of what people are saying. You need to fix this. There it was. Not, I'm sorry we abandoned you. Not, can we talk? It was an order. An accusation. I was embarrassing them. My refusal to fund their religious recruitment center was a personal slight. A stain on the family name they had so easily scrubbed me from a decade ago. The cold, logical fortress I had built around myself began to crumble. The old pain, the ghost I thought I'd exorcised, was back, and it was screaming. For 10 years, I had been a non-entity to them. Now that I had something they wanted, I was suddenly their son again, and my refusal was a public humiliation. They hadn't come to me as parents. They had come as shareholders demanding a dividend from a company they had abandoned long before it ever struck gold. They had started a war of public opinion armed with lies and half-truths. My carefully worded rejection letter was no defense against that. A press release from the board wouldn't be enough. This was personal. They had made it personal. And I realized with a chilling clarity that the only way to end it was to give them the one thing they never expected: the whole truth. I scheduled a single interview, one, with a journalist famous for her refusal to be spun a woman who ate PR statements for breakfast. I told my board what I was going to do. They were nervous, but I was resolute. I would not hide behind my foundation. I would walk into the fire myself. The television studio was cold and dark except for the blinding white lights pointed at my face. The camera lens felt like a black hole ready to swallow me whole. The journalist was professional, direct. She started with my work, the foundation, the sale of my algorithm, Synapse, for $450 million. Then she leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Mendoza," she said, her voice even, "let's talk about the story everyone is talking about. Your parents, David and Maria Mendoza, say you've turned your back on them. They say their request for funding was a plea to help the homeless and a chance to reconnect. They say you rejected them without a word. I have to ask you directly, how can you deny your own family?" This was it, the moment the entire world was waiting for. I met her gaze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show anger. I just opened the file I had prepared in my mind, the one I had been living with for 10 years. "To answer that," I said calmly, "I need to give you a clear and factual timeline. On my 18th birthday, my parents presented me with a choice: rededicate my life to their religion, the covenant of the unified word, or leave their house and their family forever. I could not in good conscience do what they asked. So they formally excommunicated me. They walked me to the front door, and they locked it behind me. That was the last time I spoke to either of them for 10 years. The journalist was silent, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. For the next 6 months, I continued, I was homeless. I slept in shelters when I could, and on park benches when I couldn't. The community that raised me, as they put it in their press release, was nowhere to be found. Eventually, I saved enough money from menial jobs to enroll in a single computer science course at a local community college. That was the start. I paused, letting the camera hold on my face. The Mendoza Initiative. My foundation is funded entirely by my personal wealth. And that wealth comes from a single source, the sale of a data compression algorithm I developed called Synapse. I sold that algorithm 5 years ago. I leaned forward slightly, making my final point with surgical precision. I wrote the first line of code for Synapse exactly 5 years after my parents severed all ties with me. They did not fund my education. They did not provide me with a roof over my head. They did not offer a single word of encouragement. My success was not achieved because of them. It was achieved in spite of them. So, to answer your question, I concluded, looking directly into the camera, into the eyes of everyone watching. I didn't deny my family. They denied me. And my foundation rejected their application, not out of spite, but because of a core principle. Their proposal required homeless people to attend their religious services, to receive food and shelter. My foundation provides aid with no strings attached. We help people who have been cast out because I was one of them. What they are doing is not charity, it's coercion. And I will never use the fortune I built from nothing to fund the very same conditional love that left me with nothing. The interview went viral before it was even over. The public narrative didn't just flip, it shattered. My story, precise and backed by a verifiable timeline, was devastatingly effective against their vague emotional appeals. Online sleuths immediately dug up my old community college records from 9.5 years ago, confirming my enrollment. Stories began to surface from people who remembered a quiet, determined kid coding in the library all day because it was warm. The backlash against my parents and the Unified Word Community Outreach Program was a tidal wave. The media outlets that had championed their cause were now running front-page stories on their hypocrisy. Donations to their organization dried up overnight. They were exposed not as loving parents, but as frauds who had tried to publicly shame their abandoned son into funding their religious agenda. My foundation's board released a unanimous statement not of defense, but of profound support for my integrity and leadership. And from David and Maria Mendoza, absolute silence. They vanished from the public eye. Their attempt to weaponize my past had failed spectacularly. But the story didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, something incredible happened. Unsolicited donations began pouring into the Mendoza Initiative. Tens, then hundreds of thousands, then millions of dollars. They came from people all over the country who had seen the interview. People who had been disowned for their beliefs or their identity. People who simply believed in standing on principle. I saw what I had to do. This was bigger than me. It was bigger than my parents. It was a chance to transform my own private pain into a public good. I announced that all the new capital would be used to launch a brand new program, the Secular Start Fund. Its mission was simple: to provide housing, education, and technology grants to young adults between the ages of 18 and 21 who have been disowned and left homeless for ideological or religious reasons. I was building the safety net I never had. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of the first housing unit funded by the new program. It was clean, bright, and safe. It wasn't a shelter, it was a launch pad. In the common area, a young woman no older than 18 sat at a desk, her face illuminated by the screen of a brand new laptop. She was focused, typing lines of code. She looked up and saw me standing there. She didn't know the specifics of my story, only that the man who had founded this place understood. She gave me a small, determined nod. I nodded back. In that silent exchange, I felt the last ghost of my past finally fade away. My parents had tried to erase me. Instead, they had given me a purpose. I hadn't just gotten revenge. I had taken the worst thing they ever did to me and used it to build a legacy of hope. A legacy that would ensure that hundreds of kids just like me would never have to face the darkness alone. That was a victory they could never touch.